sort of connect the dots, right? If I actually am not responsible for my behavior, well then I'm not responsible, right? It wasn't me who chose it. So the question of free will is actually not just a theoretical question. I think it actually does have an effect on how we think and how we behave and live our lives. So we're lucky today to have Wagdy come and join us and talk to us about this topic. And hopefully, I think, convince us that we actually do have free will. Is that right? I hope that's where we're heading. Anyway, over to you, Wagdy.
I'd like to. Hello. Hi, everyone. So maybe as we start, let me ask you first. So why? I mean, who chose the topic anyway? Was it Abuna? No. Hi. You chose it. Okay. So what? It doesn't matter who chose it or not. But the question is, what's going in anyone's head about free will versus predestination? What are the things that bothers people or think in a certain way or another way? And it doesn't matter. But I just want to start with you guys telling me what you think, and then we'll have a go.
Free will versus predestination. It's like for instance, I don't know how to compare it. It's like sometimes we're living freely and maybe relating to what you might be comfortable in certain situations, and you allow certain limits for your discomfort, but you don't push that limit. Like for instance, oh mate, I'm not comfortable with this person because that person is very, very curious, and whenever I see this person, he doesn't know about the world. He keeps on asking me about how do I live my life. I get really discomforted. I just want to leave. I've got my limits. I've pushed my limits with that person. I'm not pushing anymore. Maybe something like this, because I've lived something like this until today. This stuff, it comes backwards and forwards, especially some recent times. It has attacked me. And maybe I can speak to my confessor father and see what he says. He's behind me. I don't know what you might say relating to these stuff.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Okay, so that's, yeah, please do.
So I think the idea of the topic came because in some certain instances we feel like God has like his hand in people's lives, and for example in the Old Testament, when, I know this very common verse, but he hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so we see God's hand in things, and we wonder if there's a bigger plan and if we're destined to end up in a certain place, and where our free will kind of plays into that. So God's kind of like just his, exactly. So
but to take it, I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
To take Abuna's start with Abuna's question, when you asked me, I hope that you're going to reach that we do have free will. What do you think? Like, if you were to make a decision, if you were to sort of choose between, let's just take the extreme, just make it clear. Am I really fully predestined to whatever has been written up there and I'm going to go and that's it, no change at all? Or am I 100% I can do whatever I like? Which one would you choose, and what would be the rationale?
I think in some religions they would choose that, the predestination. They think, look, whatever I'll do is already planned for me. Like it's already written. Like whatever bad comes, it's already, it's written for me. I have to go through it and I have to accept it no matter what. And some people find comfort in that. Like they say, look, it's written for me to do this, this, and this, and I will just continue on. The Christian perspective says God's giving you the free will, but at the same time, He can foresee the idea of what you're going to do, how you're going to behave, and that is what people can mix with, say that's predestination and free will. So I think, yeah, it's very hard to explain, but yeah, for Christians, I think from our behavior we can perceive things and pretend or have this idea that we are predestined to do it, but I think we still have a free will not to do what we think we're going to have to do or what we will do.
So it's really critical to try and define what's predestination, right? A softer thing is fatalism, and we probably come from a culture that has been influenced mostly by Islam, where fatalism is really important, but to an extent that it's still actually not predestination, but it's like, yeah, qadar, fatalism, it just happens. But in a sense, it gets used to accept things, not as in like, oh mate, it's happened and it's not my, like Abuna was sort of giving the example of the researchers, it's not my fault, it's not me, I was doomed to do this, right? So let me try first. There's something called, in mathematics, something proof by contradiction. And I know it exists in philosophy, but I'm not familiar with it. But the whole concept of proving something by contradiction. So you take a proposition, and let's just say, and I'm not familiar with the philosophy side, a number that you say, like say square root of 2 is an irrational number. Irrational meaning it's not a ratio of A over B, right? And to prove that it's irrational, you go and say, I'm going to assume it is rational. And you prove that it's not. And once you prove that, you go and say, therefore it is irrational, right? So if you think about the same concept and say, if there is no free will and we are totally predestined, whatever is being written up there will happen, and I have no choice in it. I have no free will in making it happen. If that's the case, then if let's just say that's true, then the question becomes, how could God find any fault? Like really? Like if I'm created in a way where I had no choice but, so let's just take Judas Iscariot. Well, Christ talks about him, he goes, he calls him the son of perdition, like the lost son, right? He does say the Son of Man, being himself, has to be delivered and has to die no matter what. But woe to him who delivers the Son of Man. So some people would say, well, Judas had no choice.
He mainly, if he would have forgave Christ, yeah, but then he hung himself. He wasn't strongest Peter.
Yeah, but the concept, the idea of it, a point that gets raised is, well, someone had to betray Christ, and in this case it was Judas, so why do you find fault at him, irrespective of the killing himself? So if you say, if that's the case, then Judas or anyone who does anything is not at fault. So whatever I do, I'm doing it not out of my own willing. It's just, I have to, I've got no choice. So it's irrational, right? But to be honest, there are many verses that are confusing, right? We're not going to be able to go through all of them, right? But what I've chosen to do is I took about 3 verses that talk about free will, but I want to try and describe free will a bit more, and then I'll talk about 3 verses, 3 difficult verses that confuse us, that when you read them, you say, well, hang on, there's no free will. And I chose one church father to address them, and that's Origen of Alexandria, probably the most philosophical out of all of them, right? Because it's really a philosophical topic. Unfortunately, I didn't study philosophy, so I'm relying on Origen of Alexandria. But let's just to start with, free will. The importance of free will is it is not just free will, but if we think about Christianity, we are the image of God. So, and the image is, the real image is Christ. All the traits, all the characteristics, if you want to call, of Christ are mine too, with a big difference, right? So think of it as He's the infinite, and I'm part of that infinite. I'm just a small part, right? I can't add to infinity, I can't subtract from infinity, but I'm part of it. I mean, a very simple and probably inadequate analogy is like, say, the ocean and a cup. And I take a cup and I fill that cup with water from the ocean. What's inside that cup is water from the ocean. It actually does have the characteristics of that ocean, but it's not the ocean. But it is, in a sense. And that's who I am. If I don't have free will, neither did Christ. If Christ is, we call Him love, life, light, all of that, I'm supposed to be all of those in my own capacity. And the only reason I'm that is because of the incarnation. Because He took my flesh and He managed to transfer to me the characteristics, His characteristics. But it's important to understand that free will is my ability to see God and to sort of choose God. If I take you through a simple example and I say, let's just assume a really, really rich person comes and you're traveling. Let's just say you're traveling to Paris. And an extremely rich person comes in and says, here's a ticket for first class for free. You don't need to pay anything. I don't need anything from you. Here it is. Is it likely that you go and say, no, I'm going to go economy? You'd be a bit silly, right? There'd be something not right there. Because you're not paying, and it's not like the person wants anything from you. So, in a sense, you're free to choose to go to economy. But in reality, if you don't choose you don't go with the first class, you're not good up there, right? If I know that something is going to really, really hurt me compared to something that is good for me, do I have a choice? Yes, of course. In theory, I have a choice to choose between the bad and the good. But in reality, if you read the Church Fathers, you'll see that they're defining freedom as being not enslaved to something. Yeah? So the idea of freedom is not just my choice. Of course, I have the choice. But I've been told, and I understand the depth of what it means to be with God, and therefore we all, in a way, want and need to be with God. And I'm talking about at least those of us who understand who God is to some extent. But even beyond that, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes, either 3 or 6, and verse 11, I think. And it says, God is talking about humanity, and He says, and I have implanted in the human being eternity in their heart. So every human being is created with eternity in their heart. Every human being. Whether every human being has that capacity to say, I have eternity, I have God in my heart, whoever that God is to that person. And if they manage to, they'll be able to choose the right thing. Paul in Romans talks about what's called the natural law, which is, again, something inside us. If I've not been preached about God, I still know what's right and what's wrong. And then he talks about it, that our consciousness drives us to make a choice. If we go back to Genesis, we know that Cain killed Abel, but there was anything about killing being a sin. There was no law. There was no law to Moses, right? But he knew what he did was wrong. Yeah? So there is something innate in us. And that's what drives us to say, I've got to make a choice between being with God or not being with God. So maybe we'll go to the screen, Abuna, please. So we'll go through a couple of verses that really highlight, and we'll stop and talk about them quickly, that really highlight the fact that we do have choice, which I think we're all agreeing with. So this is a bit of a theoretical, or maybe so at the top here, Abuna. Yeah. So on the one hand, there are infinite number of verses that highlight humankind's free will. So the first one, for example, in Deuteronomy, I'll read it very quickly. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. I'm just giving you the choices. I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. Or logically, if I'm being given a choice between life and death, I will choose life. And he's saying choose life, but often we don't, right? If you are willing and obedient, so that's Isaiah. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword. So again, he's telling us what it is. And we know a simpler one in Genesis, Genesis 2, when God says, eat from everything, but of this tree do not eat. Because if you eat, you will surely die. It's very clear. We still had the choice, made the choice, and the consequences we know. The last one is a bit long, from Romans. Or do you despise the riches of his goodness, forbearance, and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leads you to repentance? So even when I deviate, and there's something inside me, there's that Holy Spirit that convicts me of sin, that convicts me of, it explains to me, no, you're not doing the right thing. But the patience of God is that so I can repent. But in accordance with your hardness and your impenitent heart, you are treasuring up for yourself wrath in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to each one according to his deeds. Eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, and immortality. But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish on every soul of man who does evil, of the Jew first and also of the Greek, but glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. So again, the choice is quite clear. But we all know it's not easy, right? Because why is it not easy? Because the flesh desires against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and there's that sort of constant battle. Instant gratification from money or from fame or from sexual desire, or all of these can sort of overtake the longer term. Right? It's almost, again, and simplistically, you study really hard, for example, to pass an exam, or you don't have to study. But if you study, it's painful and it's annoying, but you'll do the best you can. You should. It's unlikely that you'll sit and say, I'm not going to study at all, and hope that you'll pass. Can happen, but yeah, maybe not. So plenty of verses that talk about free will and the fact that we have to choose. The next bit is the hard bit. So we'll open up for more discussion, and I'm going to rely on Abuna because it's far more philosophical than I can cope with. So the second bit, if you go up here, Abuna, sorry. Now, so on the other hand, there are several verses that are difficult to contend with, pointing to the notion of predestination. Hereafter are a few of these verses. Okay, so I'll read the verse, and then in red, we've got the quote from Origen of Alexandria, and we'll try and sort of take one bullet point at a time, and it's only three of those, 3 verses, and so it's about 5 or 6 quotes. the verse says, but I think you were mentioning the hardening. But I will harden his, as in Pharaoh's heart, so that he will not let the people go. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. That's Exodus. And Romans, and therefore he has mercy. God has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills, he hardens. So reading this on its own, to be honest, it's quite confusing. Okay? Like, well, hang on, he's hardening. Well, who am I to say that I'm going to cope against his hardening? So let's just see what Origen said, and then we'll discuss. So Origen suggests that the heterodox, so those that are not following the main opinion, the straight opinion, or the heterodox suggests that there is no self-determination, suggesting that natures are either lost, incapable of being saved, or saved, unable to be lost. So really, we stop there for a second. It's basically got no choice. Like, you're born, it's either you're born and you're going to be tough, or you're born and you're going to be fantastic. You've got no choice. It makes you wonder why you're born. Why do I exist? Why does it make any sense? But again, there were this thought that existed for a long, long time. Unfortunately, it's also till today from specifically one sect, our beloved sect, Calvinism. So John Calvin was a reformer with Martin Luther and with Zwingli. I think it's Zwingli. He was a pretty bright guy and very, very well read, very well written. But he had this idea that concept. There's a concept called tulip, T-U-L-I-P, and each one of the letters means something which is really fairly weird, even for most of the Protestant faith. But Calvinism is very, very specific, but does believe in that concept that you almost have no choice. I'm not going to get into Calvin. So he's saying now, well, that's what the heterodox say. But if Pharaoh, so his arguments, Origen is saying, well, hang on. If that's the case, if Pharaoh was lost by nature, right, like, had no choice, he says, what need is there for his heart to be hardened? Well, he's already hardened, right? From nature, from birth. For the paper, just. But God need, But if Pharaoh was lost by nature, what need is there for his heart to be hardened, and not once, but frequently, because it happened 9 times, right? So the idea is, well, if you're by nature lost, why do you need more hardening? So he's arguing against their argument by saying, if you're right, well, why is that happening? But God needs him to be more disobedient in order to demonstrate his mighty deeds for the salvation of the many, and therefore hardens his heart. So in his view, he's saying, the way you should understand this verse is the following. The whole fundamental concept across the whole concept of the idea of predestination is something that was mentioned. I can't remember who exactly mentioned it. Is the Andrew, right? Andrew. It's the pre-knowledge of God, which is on its own very difficult for us to really comprehend, because if you say someone who knows what will happen, it becomes, well, hang on, I've got no choice in what I'm doing. That's not the case. The difference between us and God is the fact that we live in the realm of time. So we are bound by time. Every action or word or movement or whatever as it passes, it gives us the feeling that time goes by, right? But God is above time. Really hard to explain, and the easiest, and I think we talked about it last time as well, very quickly. The easiest way to explain it is Einstein's theory of relativity, which basically something called, for example, the twin paradox. Twins. If one travels at the speed of light and goes to the moon and comes back 2 years later, the person sitting on Earth would have aged by 2 years. But the guy that is constantly traveling at the speed of light, the person that's constantly traveling, doesn't change in age, called time dilation. Basically, because you're traveling at the speed of light, there's no time. So think of it this way. I am here, I cannot travel at the speed of light. God is traveling at the speed of light. To him, past, present, and future happens instantaneously. There's no difference at all. So we're talking now, but to him, it's eternity. To him, it's creation. It makes no difference. Everything is happening at the same time, and in that instant, is basically shrinks to become zero. There's also a mathematical concept called the Dirac function, which is basically, or an impulse function, that its width is zero, so it really tends to zero. Like the width keeps on going narrow and narrow and narrow. So okay, so let's just take a square, 1 by 1. The area of the square is the base 1 and the height 1. That's 1, right? No, actually, let's just do it 1 and 2. So a rectangle. No, let's keep it 1 and 1. Yeah, let's keep it 1 by 1. Now, let me half the base. I get half. And let me double the height. I get 2. Half times 2 is 1. And let's do it again. Half it again. So a quarter. So the base gets quarter, and the height becomes 4. The quarter times 4 is still 1. 1 over 10 times 10, it's still 1. 1 over a million times a million is still 1. Keep on going. One side, keep on shrinking it to 0, that's time. And the other one, what happens in life, keep on extending it to infinity. So if I'm multiplying a 0 by infinity, it's actually 1 in this case, and it can be proven. But the whole point is, for God, everything happens at once. But for me, time has to go, and I have to calculate. So when we talk about predestination, God knowing, it's not that God knows and therefore I have to do what God wants, but he knows because it's as if like he watched that video before. Like he's just watched it, he knows what's going to happen. But I'm the one that did. Pharaoh is the one that was hardened. God allowed, so the second concept is God allowed it to happen because God could interfere. I have no proof of that, but I have total belief in my heart that God stops things from happening to me. No, I don't mean things as in like pain or whatever. I'm talking about, for example, he knows that if this thing will happen, I'll fall into it. I'll fall into that sin, for example. And he says, no, I'll make him avoid this one for now. Maybe later it will be different. But my personal belief is he allows what he allows, knowing that I can cope with it. So anything that happens to me means that he knows that I can cope with it. And therefore, I will cope with it. I don't know how, but I think that's my belief. And you can go back to Paul when he says, we are never tempted with what is above our capacity. So again, concept of a ratio. 1 over 2 is half, 2 over 4 is half, 10 over 20 is half, 100 over 200 is half. The whole idea is, imagine one is my capacity to cope, and the other one is the bad thing, for argument's sake, right? The greater the temptation, the tribulations, the more he gives me capacity to cope. So it's always the same ratio half, because otherwise he'd be unfair. I remember 1987, I was at St. George, at the court, outside the church, at the court, in the courtyard, and there was I don't know his name, a visiting priest from Egypt. It was a really beautiful day. It was a sunny day. I remember it very well. And I walked out of the church, and he was standing out, and he was like visiting, as in like from Egypt and coming back. It's not like visiting and staying. I don't know why he came. And I said, "How are you?" Well, obviously speaking in Arabic. I had been in Australia for only 3 years. "How are you, Abuna? I hope you have a good time," or whatever. And he said, yeah, it's a beautiful city, it's a whatever. But unfortunately, outside the church, it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. When he said that, I said, "Thank you," and I left. I really didn't want to carry on any conversation. Because to me, he missed the point. I'm assuming he was talking about when he walks, you guys are too young, but at that time, you'd walk around the streets and you'll have news agency, and they'll have the front picture or whatever of almost naked people in newspapers, in Telegraph or something like this. So I'm assuming that when he was passing by, he saw stuff like this, and to him that's full of sin. But he missed, in my opinion, he missed Romans 8, where Paul goes, where sin abides, grace abides more. Because it's unfair if it doesn't. So, point is, God always grants. So 2 things. God is beyond time, and God can allow and not allow, knowing that I can or cannot. Doesn't matter.
So, with what you're saying, do you think that people who allow their tribulations to distance themselves from Christ, do you think that they have the capacity to overcome it, but they're letting the tribulation get between them and Christ? Yeah.
Chapter 4 of Genesis is one of my amazing verses. Chapter 4 of Genesis, Cain decides to kill his brother. God goes to him, "What's wrong with you? I can see anger. What's wrong with your countenance?" And then he goes to him, "Sin is awaiting for you, like to devour you," or something like this. "But you have power over it." So he tells that to Cain, right? The second human being in a sense. Third. Was he older than Abel? Yes, he's older than Abel. The second human being in a sense. Before the incarnation. Before I get given the Holy Spirit and all of that stuff. So I do believe that we have. Whether we do take it, the fact that we don't, it's not because I can't. It's because I don't. Any comments, Yabuna? Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, I might be a bit annoying. I've spoken to other people. I've spoken to a high church Protestant who is more Calvinistic in his ideas, and he's challenged me as well because Augustine affirms Calvinism. He likes to say that Augustine predates Calvinism, and John Chrysostom has a different take onto Romans compared to Augustine. I wanted to know your take on the 2 church fathers in between their take on Romans, but additionally to that, another question I have is, can you make the argument that the choice of doing good or bad is still predestined? For example, my like nature versus nurture, my genetics, the people I hang out with, that holds a factor into my choices. Are you truly free in the choice to do good or evil?
So I would say it's foreknown. It doesn't mean predestined. So God knows everything. Back before I leave, Augustine and St. John Chrysostom. So St. Augustine, genius. but he was really impacted by the Pelagian heresy. And often, sometimes when church fathers are faced with a heresy, they start to, you start to get every single tool in your tool shed or whatever to try and attack it. And sometimes you don't really think it through well. And unfortunately, there are a few things in St. Augustine that are not right. But also the Latin thought is very different to the Greek thought. Despite the fact that the guy is a genius and wrote massive amount of work. There's something, it's a really harsh comment that was said that I'm going to repeat. I shouldn't, but I will repeat it. I heard it from an Eastern Orthodox scholar that was saying, praising St. Augustine, but saying, I just hope he hadn't lived that long. Because towards the end of his life, he started sort of tackling difficult things because of what was happening in the Latin world and started understanding a few things, including predestination. But across the church fathers, you will never, and across even his earlier writing, you will see there's no such thing, right? And again, the logic is really simple. Like we're spending a lot of time on something, to be honest, that is really, really simple. I'm going to get back. Which is, if it's predestined in the sense that I have no choice in making it A or B because it's been said, Wagdy, you're going to have to do A. If that's the case, we're wasting time. Wasting time being here, right? I mean, logically, forget about anything else, right? The church fathers had different opinions on many things, and sometimes they had wrong things. And some of them tackled, so Origen of Alexandria has been hammered. In the last 50 years, there's been a lot more research that explained a lot of things. I'm not going to get into it. But what he did as a church father is he got into what's called speculative theology, which is at the very beginning when no one understood a lot of concepts. Tertullian is the father that really explained Trinitarianism. But again, he became a Montanist, so there's a bit of confusion about the hierarchy of the three. Justin Martyr, an amazing person, but talked about that Christ paid his blood to the devil to release us. Irenaeus believed in the 1,000 years and argued that Christ lived till the age of 40 or 50, I can't remember. I mean, there's so much stuff, right, that if we go through, we'll find some bits and pieces don't make sense, but the consensus, you need to sort of go to the consensus sort of thing. But back to the concept of Calvinism, which actually most Protestantism, like Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists, would not agree with that. Even from the Reformed, they're all Reformists, but they would not agree with some stuff that, a lot of the stuff that Calvin was more of what you call a Puritanism. They came, and then after that, a guy called John Darby as well, which was where basically capitalism comes from, where it's like, if I'm good, I pray, I do this, I do this, I do this. It's a business transaction between me and God. Fantastic. God will give me everything, right? And anyone that is suffering or whatever, it's their fault. Yeah? So, you done? Say again? Okay, yeah. Okay. So let me go into addressing the hardening. Origen refers to the goodness and justice of God, and to Matthew 5:45. He makes his sun. So we know that God makes his sun rise on the good and the bad, and his rain on the good and the bad. He then connects it to Hebrews 6, 7, 8. For the earth which drinks in the rain that often comes upon it and bears herbs, useful for those by whom it is cultivated, receives blessing from God. The point is here, the rain comes upon the inferior earth, but the underlying element being uncared for and uncultivated yields thorns and thistles. So what he's trying to say is, his last sentence here, he says, highlighting that the sun has the ability to loosen wax and to bind mud. I mean, the whole idea is I can loosen, like the sun can loosen wax, but it can take mud because of the water and it can make it harder. Emphasizing that it's the same power of the sun, but the quality of the wax and mud is different. Basically, it's the same God. It depends on me. A very big fundamental difference between Christianity and specifically Islam is that we believe that we have a role to play. It's not just God is there and like we're puppets that He does whatever He wants, right? There's what you'd call the two sides of a coin. Two sides of a coin. There's the divine activity. There's the divine activity and the human response. The divine activity comes first. It's God that sort of pushes me and explains to me and goes into my heart. You know, the eternity that is in my heart, the baptism that I've received, the communion that I have done, the natural law that I know, all of these are there to push me to try and understand and comprehend Him. And in our case, the incarnation has given us a lot more. Then I have to do something about it. It's like, very simplistically, no analogy will suffice. But someone gives you a check, $1 trillion check. Put it in your pocket. You have to go and check it. You have to go and cash it. God has given me this. I have to take an action to do something with it. But it is God's grace.
Sir, I think I missed something. But you were explaining that the same heat from the sun makes the wax loose and the mud hard, right? It still sounds like that you're created in a certain way and you're going to respond to a certain way to God. So you're out of luck, basically.
Again, if we are out of luck, there is no God. Because if I'm created in a way that I have no choice but reacting, what he's trying to say here, I get your point. Like he's saying, I'm either mud or wax. And therefore, if sun falls on me, and if I'm wax, I'm going to melt. If I'm mud and sun falls, I get your argument. And I think that's a fair enough argument. Abuna would have to get involved for philosophical stuff. But I think his point here is the mud and the wax is my heart, my attention to it. It's what I give. God has given me so think about the Jews. No, but I make it. Like He's created me. So has God created anything evil? Has God created evil? Right? So if God is not the creator of evil, then I choose the lack of good and therefore when I keep away from the good, I do an evil. That's me doing it. So it's almost like I choose. Yeah, but I choose to make myself, my heart or my ear, wax or mud. Abuna, do you want to? Yes.
I think what he's saying is we choose whether to be wax or mud. And that's why when the sun shines on us, things turn out the way that they do.
Sorry, just to add from what Jerome was saying before about genetics and...
Yes.
So if your genetics create you prone to, I don't know, violence, or you're prone to anger or something like that. I know everyone has their own faults and talents, blah, blah, but what would you say to... Well,
is it something out of my...
Well, let's say I grew up in a violent home, And let's say I grew up in a violent home, and so I respond to things how I was exposed to things, and so I'm just more prone to violence because of that. Or
but what's prone? The word prone sounds to me like the word prone sounds to me like I have no choice because you know, people use the word, and I understand what you're saying. It's like, oh mate, I get angry very quickly. Yeah, I get it. But does it mean that I have no choice? So if that's the case, then what is it called? You know, the anger classes, say again? Whatever it is, like all these sort of systems, the psychologists that help you to sort of think, or be waste of time.
Yeah.
It's true, but again, what I'm trying to say, it's my choice.
Yeah.
So I worry about the word prone meaning like I've got no choice in it.
Yeah, like used as an excuse.
Say again?
It's like used as an excuse to be a
Yeah, I
certain
mean,
way.
not just an excuse, but if I say I'm prone, the whole concept of nature, of being what one ought to be and what is. Like, so being is like, is an ontological thing, is something that I can't change. Like, I'm by nature a human being, for example. I can't be a dog, right? Yeah, don't get that. It's sort of, you can in your head because of mental illness and problems. So I think we need to be careful with this sort of stuff. But I'm talking about it in reality. I cannot be. That's ontological. If I say that evil is ontological, that's it. That's it. I'm good because I could do whatever I want and God cannot judge me. Like I would go and tell him, mate, you cannot judge me because you made me that way. I was prone to doing this and I did it, right? So again, it goes back to if I have no choice in what I do, then I think he would be a very unjust God.
So can I jump in and jump back to Jerome's question as well? I think we have to be careful how we understand freedom, right? In the modern West, we think of freedom as being complete freedom, right? You can literally choose to do anything you want. The reality is you can't. If I choose to flap my arms and fly, yes, I can choose that that's what I'm going to do, but I'm not free to do that because I'm not a bird. Right? So yes, freedom is a very limited concept. It cannot simply mean free to do anything at all you want. I'm coming to that, don't worry. Yeah. So that's once we've got that, then we ask, well, where is the scope for freedom then? And yes, you're born with your nature and your nurture, and that determines a lot. You may be prone to, act in certain ways. But I think where we are free is in the moral choice. So let's say I'm born with the genetics of thieves, both my parents were thieves. They bring me up to be a thief. But one day I'm going to hear someone say, stealing is wrong. Or I'm going to see a victim who suffers because of the stealing. Now, I am free then to respond and say, even though everything in me is saying, steal, but now I'm starting to doubt whether that's a good thing, right? That's where the freedom abides. And in a sense, that's why we can't really judge any other person, because you may see someone who's doing horrible things, but given their background, they could have been doing twice as badly. And because they chose and fought against their nature and their nurture and everything, they're only half as bad as they could have been. That person may be superior in the eyes of God to someone who had a beautiful Christian upbringing and maybe just did a few sins, small sins. Right? From the outside, we don't see that. We just measure it in sort of, simple terms. But God looks at the heart and he knows what we start with, and then the moral choices that we make, that's where our freedom abides. And that's where we get judged. And That's the parable of the 10 talents and the 5 talents and the 1 talent, right? You don't expect another 10 from the guy who only had 5. Is it? Yeah.
While I can understand that freedom, like you're mentioning, and I think Wagdy's also made a great argument that, let's distill the point. You can have freedom of some choice, you may not have freedom of consequence in terms of what that intention has, but it still seems like there's a main problem which hasn't been contended with, in that even though there is this freedom, it's functionally not really there if there's a concept of hell in the first place. Because you can try and go down this moral high ground or whatever else, but if there's a lock-in reality, you either end up in this heaven or in this potential place of suffering, then it doesn't really matter whether or not you choose, like you want to do it or you don't, because the true consequence is a potential eternity of whatever else. And I've seen some people grapple with that by redefining what hell is or redefining what heaven is or whatever else, but I wonder how you would respond, because then that still allows you to have a freedom of choice.
So I'm not quite sure what it is you're sort of putting forward. Are you saying that because there's the threat of hell, we really don't have a choice, we have to be good? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, like to some capacity, because it's like it's not really an option not to do otherwise.
Yeah, no, look, I you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to redefine the concept of hell. Not redefine, actually, because what I think I'm doing, as far as I know, is going back to the original understanding in the church, which is that hell is not something imposed upon people against their will. It's something that people choose for themselves. As C.S. Lewis said, the gates of hell are locked from the inside. And it's not something just in the future. It's something we create for ourselves right now in this life. And the eternal aspect of it is God gives us what we chose for ourselves. The person who chooses to be selfish is creating a prison, a hellish prison for themselves. It's just nature, right? The person who steps off a cliff falls down splat. It's just nature. That's how nature works.
I think also so if you read the church fathers and you see what they try and define the word freedom, it's not really what we define it in general, as in true freedom is choosing God. It's just as simple as that. And the most obvious verse is Christ says, and the truth will set you free. And He is the truth. So in a sense, I am only free if I'm choosing God. And the notion of that is not because I have trouble personally to think that, and to be honest, I think a lot of Christians think that way. Is I'm going to choose God because I'm afraid from hell. I think that's a really, really wrong concept. Irrespective of how you define hell, and I'll probably define it very differently to most, but the notion of, so I'll give you an example. Again, I'm trying to use analogies that will never be fulfilling enough, and we're not going to go through the last two quotes because it's all the same. If I'm a father who really engage with my kids, really engage, like constantly, throughout their life, and I did everything with them as much as I can, all of that, and then one of them goes overseas or whatever, I would really feel the lack, the lack of presence. Like if it's some far away and forget about FaceTime and all that stuff, let's just assume I can't interact with that child because I used to be all the time. I think I'll feel that emptiness very strongly. If I were a father who actually really busy, working, making money, no, not bad, but, working really hard, 18 hours a day, working in shifts and owning a 7-Eleven, for example, and I'm just have to work instead of paying 2.5 times for someone else, blah, blah, blah. and I'm spending all my life that way. I didn't manage to know my kids. I didn't manage to enjoy them as much. When one of these children sort of goes away for studying overseas or goes somewhere else or whatever, I don't think I'll feel the same feeling as if I had that connection with that thing. And therefore, the notion of eternity, again, is a bit misunderstood. Eternity starts here, and it starts here through love, not fear of something. If you go to Paul, 1 Corinthians 13, when he talks about the three things, faith, hope, I can't remember the order, but faith, hope, and love. And he says, and the greatest is love. 37 years ago, I heard Abuna Peshoy Yassa from Abu Sufyan. Yeah, an absolute saint in. Yeah, but as a person, he was just a man of prayer. And anyway, amazing. He mentioned the following. He said, the reason that love is the greatest of the three is because that's what keeps there. Because if I get there, well, I've reached the destination, the hope. If I get there, well, I've fulfilled the faith. I had faith. But it's love that carries on. And a couple of years, I'll finish, sorry. And a couple of years ago, there was a bishop called Karras, Amba Karras. He's the bishop in Mahalla. Really lovely man. He died from COVID 2-3 years ago. Something like that, yep. He would say, our relationship with God today, and as we progress in our life, is, that love that I just mentioned about from my child or whatever, is the more I love him now, the more I understand him and love him more. And by the way, if you read the Church Fathers, that doesn't stop. There's a verse, and I can't remember, I think it's Corinthians, when Paul says, and we grow from glory to glory. That still happens in eternity for a very simple reason. God is infinite. And the idea that, how people talk about levels in heaven, and I might be crucified for this, it doesn't make any sense to me. The level is inside me. That is, if I loved God, if I'm loving God that much here, and we're all going to keep on loving him more over there. We will keep constantly. But my starting point could be here, but Paul's starting point is over there, right? So I think my understanding of the level is not because it's Paul and because he went through all this pain, and it's just because he loved more. And the most simple example is Luke 7. The harlot who comes and washes Christ's feet, and then Christ goes to Simon the Pharisee. When Simon said, if this man was a prophet, he would have known. Is that this coming? Right. Okay, that one. But what Christ goes, he says to Simon, because she loved much, she'll be forgiven much. So I struggle with the notion of when people say we want God because we're fearful. And it's true. It is mostly the dominant thing. I stopped you from.
It's irrelevant, or it's an unideal point, but yet it still exists, and there still seems to be a massive body with that idea. And so because the concept of hell exists, although unideal, and the very fact that it still serves to be a motivation, I feel goes against the point of the love. Because it's like, well, I can be a tyrant and I can say, do this or I'll kill you. Or I can try and sort of suggest in a positive way, but if you don't listen to me, I'm actually still going to kill you. It doesn't really feel like it's an element of love.
Yeah, but I think what I'm trying to say, and I understand, and you're right, I suppose I'm trying to say is, as a Christian, I need to change the way I think. And the killing, the pain, you're going to be too hot over there and whatever that means, all of this sort of stuff. But I'm going to be deprived of him. And that's the biggest problem. And the love I have for my wife today, or for my kids today, the thought of being deprived of them, which could happen anytime, is the biggest problem. So, if he came, he took my flesh, and then he says, I'm giving you everything. And by the way, I'm doing this when you didn't ask for it. And by the way, I'm doing this where you're an absolute filth. And by the way, I'm doing this so I can keep you for me forever because I betrothed you to me. All of this. And if I then end up by saying, stuff you, I'm leaving, that is the problem. It's not because I'm going to end up in hell, whatever that means. But the fact that I won't be with him is the most painful thought, I think. As opposed to, unfortunately, we focus, and you're right, we focus a lot on about hell and this and sometimes it's used to even make people fear, and therefore, to your point, don't do that because this will happen, and therefore do. And I don't think that actually works. I think it's just rhetoric. Did you want to say?
Yeah, if I could. I actually, this is going to sound horrible, but I don't think heaven is populated by scared people. That's not my view of heaven. I'm not sure that works. An analogy for what you're saying might be this. I think this is the right analogy. I'm cold. And you say, here is a blanket. I say, no, I want to be able to warm up by stepping into the fridge. You say, no, here is a blanket. No, I want my freedom. I'm going to step into the fridge and warm myself up. What are you going to do? Right? All you can do without forcing me is say, here is the blanket. This is why the blanket will work and the fridge won't. If I insist in going on the fridge, it's not your fault. It's not a punishment in the sense that I don't like you and I'm going to force you to be cold. It's very simple. If you reject light, there's nothing left but darkness.
Just to respond to that, while I agree, sure, if you make the assumption that this is the way it works. However, I think what differs is, in the analogy, God chooses that the fridge can make you warm or cold. So if he sets the rules in that, let's say that he makes the universe that the fridge actually does make you warm, then it therefore dispenses completely with it. That's what I'm saying. I think the notion
But what you're
itself
saying is that God doesn't make evil good. That's basically what you're saying now. God doesn't make murder good. If he made murder good, then I wouldn't have to go to hell. That's what you're saying. It's the implication of what you're saying.
The concept of the whole, the fact, so you're trying to say that it's actually there is a natural order, and if you don't follow said natural order, then here's the inevitable consequence. But he created the natural order, and he also created the natural consequence. And so to some capacity, the element of consequence existing in itself functionally eliminates the freedom to act within it. Now, I think it seems more appropriate based on what you're saying to dispense of it a separate way. Instead, you can get rid of the notion altogether about freedom and say, well, you don't really have that much freedom, but you can either choose to comply this way or not, or you can try and redefine it and say, well, here's limited freedom in that, it's kind of like the Camus saying, you could be like Sisyphus going up the rock, but you could choose to be happy, but you're still going to be going up that mountain. So I'm just confused where you stand in what camp.
How would you consider what happened to what Judas Iscariot did, and why did he go back and say, I've betrayed I've done something wrong, here's the money, and I've betrayed a righteous man. Forget about committing suicide for now. But what happened? What do you think that? Say again? Why? Right. So the criminal on the right-hand side, or whatever he is, someone who led all his life doing terrible things. What made him, at the worst time that you could see Christ, not the miracle performer, not the guy that walks on water or any of that sort of stuff, but the guy that is totally humiliated on the cross, what makes him say to the other guy, we deserve what we've done because of what we've done. We got because of what we've done. But this man is a righteous man. And then he turns to Christ in his worst possible moment when all his disciples left him except for John at the bottom of the cross. He goes, remember me when you come to your kingdom. I mean, how on earth did he see that this Christ, crucified Christ, has a kingdom? What happened?
Example of free, like I guess the notion I'm trying to get at is, it seems that free will is only consistent if you're having the choice without consequence. I think the examples you're talking about, I'm not denying, sure, like there's a clear difference in that this person's willing to, redefine their life and go through the natural order. I'm not contending with that because clearly that's a line which is consistent. I'm just trying to say that the very fact of consequence itself diminishes the notion of free will itself. I guess that's what perhaps that's missed, or perhaps I didn't explain it too well, but I'm happy to continue after the talk.
Sorry, I wouldn't.
Very few people, I mean, he's a nihilist. And people, yes, but he is in fact, right? He's certainly countered that by everybody else who reads him. And nihilism has so many logical problems with it. It is not a plausible way of looking at the world. And in modern philosophy of moral philosophy, nihilism is one of the only, either you have nihilism, there is nothing that's good or evil, therefore it really doesn't matter what you do. That's the kind of freedom Camus sort of imagined, right? There are no consequences really, so we can just do whatever we want, and you can just kill yourself and who cares. Or there is a genuine good and evil, and the vast majority of modern philosophers accept there is a genuine good and evil, an objective good and evil. It doesn't depend on what I think and what you think. And that means there are genuine consequences to the world. Why did God make it that way? Imagine a world in which there aren't consequences. That actually leaves you with no freedom. That leaves you with randomness, right? Because you have no basis on which to make your choice. If every choice I make is going to get me to heaven, I have no freedom, right? Whether I like it or not, I'm going to heaven. What if I don't want to go to heaven? Right? That's the choice God gives us. That's a genuine, substantial, chunky moral choice. That's something that actually matters. I can't imagine how the world could have been different, actually. If you can imagine a way it could have been different, we can talk about it after.
I was actually going to say, relating to what you're saying earlier, like sometimes the saddest thing no one does, especially nowadays, especially when the world's going into many wars, it looks like many people have to sort of self-deny themselves, go against yourself, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. Like one example, my supervisor at work, he goes, man, I've been working for 10 years, and I'm not always the correct person. Imagine you got a position for being a supervisor, which is like a manager. Then you got a manager. Yes, you got all this knowledge to run it, to manage the business and supervise, but also in these management levels, you're not always the correct person. There's new things that they're coming out. Even your workers can get it. They're not going to bombard your position. Right.
I think what you're saying is, we when you say we go against ourselves or whatever, is like you're making a choice between A or B. Is that, yeah? That's dictated. I think it's Peter, is that correct? I think if I understand the fundamental premise of what Peter is saying is, if a choice has a consequence, it then doesn't become free. Because it is obvious that I'm going to choose, I have to choose the right thing, if I understood you. Close enough. And again, the alternative is what Bruno was saying is, the extreme is to say, well, if there's no consequences, because it doesn't matter, no such thing as good or evil, you get into nihilism, and therefore it doesn't really matter. Look, I don't know. I think my view is we're pretty blessed in a way that we understand. We're in a place that really talks about Christ, and that the fact that sorry, you want to have a question? The fact that Christ took. I always go back to the incarnation. The fact that Christ took my flesh means that I've been given an amazing capacity to do whatever I'm supposed to do. And it's not like I'm supposed to do because, like at the beginning, God told them, do not eat, but if you eat, that will happen. They did. But the whole idea is it didn't end that way. He was the one that sort of then rescued them, rescued humanity. You go to the Theotokia of Monday, which very simple theology of I don't know it in Coptic. Yeah, but I mean the bit that I'm talking about is at the very beginning. It says when Adam was saddened, it pleased God to help him or to save him. And the word pleased and whatever happens so many times. So there's joy in God bringing me to him. And at the end of the day, I think foreknowledge is different to predestination. And if we do not have free will, it means Christ took a fake humanity.
So, sorry, I think we're going to have to wrap up because the time has run away with us.
That last question.
But I'm sure Max will come and ask you afterwards. Okay. Can be first in line. And please do come and buy Wagdy with many questions, as many as you like. I'm sure he'll... You don't have anything else to do tonight, do you, Wagdy? So, are there announcements?
There's pizza outside.
Very.
The next PKF meeting will be an activity again. So we'll be doing shoeboxes combined with Blacktown, and Abuna Andrew Francis will be giving a talk before that. So talk segment, and then after it we'll be doing the shoeboxes. Okay.
Yes, that's shoeboxes for poor children, of course. Like, yes. Yeah, putting toys. Shall we stand up and pray? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. Go in pizza. The Lord be with you.